At around 5:40 p.m. on Thursday the 9th of September 2021, 16-year-old Rhamero West met up with friends after finishing up his first day back at college. He had just entered his first year after finishing secondary school in the summer that had just passed. The young boy had dreams of making something of himself. He was studying catering, and although he might not have necessarily surrounded himself with like-minded people, he wanted to go against the grain and pursue a genuine career. However, that first day at college would sadly be his last. We don't know a huge context behind this case because that's just simply what it is. Detectives can't give a motive, and they themselves haven't established a connection between all parties involved. So we'll start this case off just prior to 5:40 p.m. on that fateful Thursday. Rhamero had travelled to Millennium Park in the Moss Side area of Manchester, up in the north of England. We'll assume that he was either on Raby Street or Great Western Street. These lie beside the park. Out of nowhere, a BMW 1 Series containing Giovanni Lawrence, the driver, and two passengers, Marquise Richards and Ryan Cashin, along with the BMW 3 Series whose occupants to this day are unknown, drove past at speed. Startled but thinking nothing of it, Rhamero and friends continued to drive normally towards Princess Road, the main road a stone's throw away. Given the fact that it was 5:40 p.m, to say it was busy would be an understatement, so off they turned onto the main road and waited in rush hour traffic. The friends would share a laugh as they waited, but laughter would soon turn to panic. You see, Marquise Richards had approached the driver's side of the car and began to lunge at it with a large knife several times. He would later go on to testify that he'd been in the area with friends picking up cannabis from a dealer. All of a sudden he said that Rhamero, who had been driving the vehicle, had drove towards this dealer attempting to run him over. He became infuriated and wanted to confront them about what had happened, so he ran up to the car and kicked the door several times to scare them. However, he said upon doing so, he saw all five produce knives, and so he was passed a knife himself, to which he lunged at the window several times to no avail. But although he gave this testimony, it should be noted that there's nothing to suggest that this had been the motive behind the first initial attack. Either way, Rhamero and friends would flee the scene, taking off in the car. Marquise's group would run back to their car, and the chase was on. A high-speed chase was ongoing throughout the streets of Manchester. Swerving in and out of traffic, driving on the opposite side of the road, Rhamero and friends were in a desperate bid to escape the knifemen. The chase would finally end on Upper Chiltern Road, roughly a mile and a half away. Rhamero had been driving erratically and crashed into a car, but would go on to plough into a tree. Everyone then jumped out and fled on foot. However, Ryan Cashin and Marquise Richards were just behind them. Footage would go on to capture the moment Marquise would jump out of his vehicle and would begin to give chase. It wouldn't last long, however, because by the time he got to Norton Street, just around the corner, he ran out of breath, but Ryan still had a lot of gas in the tank. In a move straight out of a relay race, Marquise passed the knife to Ryan and he continued to pursue Rhamero, who by this point had been knocking on people's doors to let him in. One witness said she saw Rhamero being chased. He'd been banging on a door to try and get in, but received no answer. He then jumped over the wall to another house as he tried to get away. Sadly, he would never escape. Rhamero resorted to laying down in the front garden in order to hide himself, but Ryan would soon catch up to him and shouted, "Ah, got you." Rhamero was stabbed 5 times. Shouts of "come on, get in the car" were heard, so both Ryan and Marquise fled the scene. Rhamero was initially able to stand up and started to walk. Blood pumped from his legs. That's where he received the stab wounds. He was up but unsteady on his feet. However, he soon collapsed and neighbours rushed to aid him. They stayed by his side until paramedics arrived. When they did, they had to perform open heart surgery in the street. He was then taken to hospital but was ultimately pronounced dead at around 7:30 p.m. So a murder investigation was opened into the incident and the BMW was found abandoned shortly after. A forensic search of the car found Marquise's DNA on the front passenger seat, whilst Ryan's had been found on the rear passenger seat. Giovanni's had been found on the driver's seat adjuster, windscreen wiper controls and driver's seat belt buckle. They were banged to rights. However, they went on the run. In the weeks following the incident, both Ryan and Marquise were arrested and charged with murder. Giovanni fled to Cheshire, where he was eventually arrested in January of 2022, roughly 4 months after the murder. Although Giovanni had been the driver and Marquise had stopped the chase due to him running out of breath, they were both charged under joint enterprise. In other words, although they hadn't actually killed anyone, the intention of murder was there. In court, both Marquise and Ryan gave testimony. In other words, they were trying to downplay their roles in what happened. We've already heard from Marquise, but Ryan, on the other hand, said this was a case of mistaken identity and claimed he knew who the real killer was. However, would decline to name that person because he feared that he or his family could be under threat. But the mountain of evidence, including CCTV footage, painted a clear image for the jury, and all three were found guilty in relation to the case. Marquise was handed a life sentence with the minimum term of 17 years, Ryan was handed a life sentence with the minimum term of 23 years, whilst Giovanni was handed a life sentence with the minimum term of 20 years. "Your son's been smoked," is what Marquise shouted towards Rhamero's mother after he'd been sentenced, a mother in agony suffering with the loss of a child. All she wanted was an answer. Why? Why did they do this? But sadly, this was the response she got. A cutthroat gesture, as it's being described. From the moment Rhamero was stabbed all the way until those words were shouted at her and beyond, Rhamero's mother has spent nights depending on medication to help her sleep. Her life's been turned upside down. She's even lost her job because of this incident. In the end, the perpetrators showed no remorse and were disrespectful. They laughed and smiled throughout the trial, as this poor mother would have to relive her son's final moments.